The arrogant proposal. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Hotel cast rainbow fragments across marble floors that had hosted presidents and princes. Tonight, however, they illuminated something far more dangerous than political summits or royal galas. They illuminated Damien Cross in his element. At 28, Damien possessed the kind of wealth that made headlines and the kind of arrogance that made enemies. His custom Italian suit fit like liquid shadow. His dark hair was styled with careless precision, and his green eyes held the calculating gleam of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He stood at the center of the ballroom, champagne flute raised, commanding attention as naturally as breathing. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried easily over the murmur of 300 guests, each worth at least 8 figures, "I find myself bored by the predictable pleasures of yet another charity gala." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Damien's reputation for turning social events into his personal theater was legendary. Last year, he had auctioned off a week in his Malibu mansion to the person who could best explain why they deserved luxury. The year before, he had offered a Lamborghini to whoever could make him genuinely laugh. Tonight's entertainment remained a mystery, which made everyone simultaneously nervous and excited. "Therefore," he continued, setting his glass on a nearby table with theatrical precision, "I propose a little game, a test of skill, grace, and courage." He gestured toward the polished dance floor that dominated the center of the ballroom. "The Golden Waltz Challenge." The crowd pressed closer, diamonds glittering and silk rustling. Damien's smile was sharp enough to cut glass as he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a velvet box. Inside, nestled against midnight blue satin, lay a sapphire bracelet that had once belonged to Austrian royalty. The gasps that followed were audible. "The rules are simple," Damien announced, snapping the box closed. "Anyone, and I do mean anyone, who can keep pace with me through a full waltz wins this bracelet and the honor of being my dance partner for the remainder of the social season. That includes the governor's ball, the museum gala, and the New Year's masquerade." The crowd buzzed with excitement and calculation. Being Damien Cross's partner for a season meant access to exclusive events, valuable connections, and the kind of social capital that opened doors across continents. Several young women in the crowd began eyeing each other competitively, already planning their approach. Damien's eyes swept the room with predatory satisfaction. He had trained in ballroom, dancing from childhood, his grandmother's insistence, and had refined his skills at elite academies across Europe. He was particularly skilled at the waltz, that most challenging and romantic of dances. In his mind, this was simply another opportunity to demonstrate his superiority while amusing his friends and humiliating his rivals. "Of course," he added, with false modesty, "I should warn you that I don't intend to make this easy. I trained with the Vienna State Opera Ballet. I've waltzed with princesses and prima ballerinas. I expect nothing less than perfection." Margaret Whitmore, a senator's daughter with professional ballet training, stepped forward first. The crowd parted respectfully as she approached Damien with practiced grace. Her cream-colored gown flowed like liquid pearls, and her blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon that had probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "I accept your challenge, Damien," she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone born into privilege. Damien's smile was all teeth. "Excellent. Shall we begin?" The orchestra, apparently warned in advance about tonight's entertainment, struck up a classic Viennese waltz. Margaret took Damien's hand with ballet-trained poise, and they began to move across the floor in perfect synchronization. Their technique was flawless, their timing impeccable, their partnership the kind that dance instructors used as examples, and it was utterly, completely boring. They danced with mechanical precision, but no soul, their movements technically perfect, but emotionally vacant. The crowd watched politely, but there was no magic, no spark, no moment where anyone forgot they were watching a performance rather than experiencing genuine artistry. After exactly 3 minutes, Damien released Margaret. With a courteous bow. "Lovely technique," he said, his tone making it clear that technique alone wasn't enough. "But I'm afraid the bracelet requires something more inspiring." Margaret's cheeks flushed pink, but she maintained her composure as she retreated into the crowd. 3 more women tried their luck over the next 20 minutes. A Russian oligarch's daughter with Bolshoi training, a French ambassador's niece who had studied at the Paris Opera, a tech heiress who had won amateur competitions across California. Each dance was technically proficient. Each dance left Damien obviously unmoved. Each failure made the crowd more restless and the remaining potential challengers more nervous. Surely someone in this room has a soul hidden beneath all that expensive breeding, Damien mused aloud, his voice carrying just enough disdain to sting. His gaze swept across the faces of the wealthy elite, finding them wanting. Or perhaps true passion is too common for such refined company. It was then that his eyes fell on the edges of the ballroom, where the catering staff moved quietly between tables, refilling champagne glasses and clearing plates with invisible efficiency. His attention focused on one server in particular, a young woman with rich brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the standard black uniform that marked her as help rather than guest. She was beautiful in an understated way that made the overdressed socialites look artificial by comparison. Her movements as she worked showed an unconscious grace that caught his attention, and there was something in her posture, straight-backed and proud despite her circumstances, that intrigued him. More importantly, she represented everything. His current audience was not. She was common, working class, utterly outside their social sphere. She would be the perfect way to punctuate his point about the soullessness of privilege while providing maximum entertainment value. Damien's smile turned predatory as he raised his voice to carry across the ballroom. "You there?" he called out, pointing directly at the young woman. "Yes, you with the champagne tray. Would you care to try your luck?" The ballroom fell silent. Every head turned toward the serving staff, and every face showed the same expression of shocked amusement. The idea of a waitress challenging Damien Cross at ballroom dancing was so absurd it bordered on performance art. The young woman froze like a deer in headlights, her dark eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been anger. For a moment, Damien thought she might simply ignore him and continue working. That would be disappointing. He had been hoping for at least a few moments of entertainment, watching her stumble through a few basic steps before giving up in embarrassment. But then she did something unexpected. She set down her tray with deliberate care, smoothed her simple black skirt, and looked directly at him with eyes that held no fear whatsoever. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Damien's grin widened. This was going to be even better than he had hoped. The unexpected challenger. Valentina Reyes had been invisible for so long that being suddenly thrust into the spotlight felt like stepping into fire. 300 pairs of eyes focused on her with expressions ranging from amused curiosity to outright disdain. She could hear the whispered comments already beginning. "What does he think he's doing? And this should be entertaining, and poor girl doesn't know what she's getting into." But Valentina had been underestimated her entire life, and she had learned to find strength in other people's assumptions about her limitations. At 24, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that her circumstances couldn't diminish. Her uniform was pressed and spotless, her hair neat despite working a 12-hour shift, and her hands steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She had been serving champagne to people who spent more on a single bottle of wine than she made in a month, moving through their world like a ghost, but she had also been watching. She had been watching the dancing. "I asked you a question," Damien called out, his voice carrying that particular tone wealthy men used when they expected immediate compliance. "Are you going to accept my challenge, or should I find someone with more courage?" The calculated insult hung in the air. Valentina felt her co-worker Maria grab her arm in warning. "Don't," Maria whispered urgently in Spanish. "These people, they'll eat you alive for sport. Just keep working and let them have their fun." But something in Damien's smirk, so confident, so certain of his superiority, ignited a flame that had been carefully banked for too long. Valentina thought of her grandmother's hands, teaching her the basic steps in their tiny apartment, music crackling from an old radio. She thought of the community center classes where she had learned to truly dance, not because she could afford proper instruction, but because Mrs. Patterson had seen something in her and refused to let talent go to waste. She thought of the hours spent practicing in empty school gymnasiums and church halls, dancing with shadows and dreams. Most of all, she thought of Raphael, her younger brother, who was probably hunched over medical textbooks right now in their shared apartment, studying by lamplight to save on electricity. Everything she did was for his future, for the dreams they both carried. She worked 3 jobs, catering, house cleaning, and weekend shifts at a diner to keep him in school. She had sacrificed her own education, her own dreams, so he could become the doctor their family had never been able to afford. But for just one moment, she wanted to reclaim a piece of herself that she had set aside in service to everyone else's needs. "Yes," she said clearly, stepping away from Maria's restraining hand. "I'm serious." The ballroom erupted in barely suppressed laughter and excited murmurs. Several people pulled out their phones, already anticipating a viral moment. Valentina could see the social media posts forming. "Waitress thinks she can dance with Millionaire. You won't believe what happens next." Damien's expression shifted from amusement to something sharper as she approached. Up close, she was even more striking than he had first noticed. Her dark eyes held depths that spoke of experiences far beyond her apparent years. And there was something in the way she moved, a natural grace that hadn't been taught in expensive studios but had been earned through living. "What's your name?" he asked as she stopped before him, close enough now that he could see the slight tremor in her hands that she was working to control. "Valentina," she said simply. "Well, Valentina," he drawled, enjoying the theatrical moment, "I hope you understand that when you fail, and you will fail, it won't be because I took pity on you. I don't believe in participation trophies." Valentina met his gaze steadily. "I wouldn't want you to." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps at her composure. He had expected nervousness, stammering, maybe even tears. Instead, she stood before him with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced real challenges and survived them. The orchestra, sensing the drama of the moment, began the opening strains of Chopin's waltz in A-flat major. It was a piece that required not just technical skill, but emotional depth, the kind of music that separated true dancers from mere technicians. Damien extended his hand with theatrical flourish, expecting her to hesitate, to reveal her inexperience in how she approached this most basic of dance interactions. Instead, Valentina placed her hand in his with the confidence of someone who understood that dancing was about partnership, not dominance. The moment their hands touched, something electric passed between them. Damien felt it immediately, a connection that went beyond the physical, a sense of potential that he had never experienced with any of his previous partners. Valentina's eyes widened slightly, suggesting she felt it too. But there was no time to process this unexpected development because the music was building and the dance demanded their attention. Damien began with a simple box step, testing her knowledge of fundamentals. Valentina followed effortlessly, her body responding to his lead with intuitive precision. Good, but not surprising. Most people could manage basic steps. He increased the complexity, adding turns and variations that required genuine skill. Valentina not only kept up but began to anticipate his movements, her body attuned to the subtle shifts in pressure and direction that marked an experienced dancer. The crowd's laughter began to fade, replaced by surprised murmurs. Emboldened by her competence, Damien attempted a sequence that had challenged even Margaret Whitmore, a series of rapid spins combined with traveling steps that required perfect timing and absolute trust between partners. It was the kind of combination that separated amateurs from professionals. Valentina not only executed it flawlessly, but added her own subtle flourishes, a slight arch of her back during the turns, a graceful extension of her free arm that created beautiful lines, tiny adjustments that showed she wasn't just following his lead, but actively participating in the creation of something beautiful. The ballroom fell completely silent, except for the soaring melody of Chopin's waltz. But it was when the music reached its emotional crescendo that something magical happened. Valentina stopped merely following and began to truly dance with him. She matched his intensity with her own, her movements becoming not just technically perfect, but emotionally expressive. Where his steps were precise, hers were passionate. Where his technique was flawless, hers was soulful. For the first time in his life, Damien found himself being challenged not just to dance better, but to dance with more heart. They moved across the marble floor like they had been partners for years, their bodies in perfect synchronization, their connection so intense that everyone watching could feel it. This wasn't just a dance, it was a conversation, an argument, a seduction, and a revelation all at once. As the final notes of the waltz faded, they came to rest in the center of the floor, still holding each other, both breathing hard from exertion and something far more dangerous. The ballroom remained silent for a long moment, as if everyone was afraid to break the spell that had just been woven. Then Theodore Blackwood, Damien's mentor and business partner, began to applaud. Slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. One by one, others joined him until the entire ballroom thundered with appreciation. But Damien barely heard it. He was staring into Valentina's dark eyes, seeing something there that he had never encountered before. A woman who could match him, challenge him, and somehow make him want to be worthy of the partnership they had just created. Valentina stepped back, breaking their connection with what seemed like physical effort. Her cheeks were flushed, her breathing unsteady, but her voice was calm when she spoke. "I believe that bracelet belongs to me now," she said quietly. The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter, but Damien found himself wondering if what he had just lost was far more valuable than what she had won. The dance that changed everything. Theodore Blackwood had witnessed many transformations in his 45 years of life, but he had never seen one happen so completely in the span of a single waltz. Standing at the edge of the marble dance floor, champagne forgotten in his hand, he watched his protégé experience what could only be described as an awakening. Theodore had known Damien since the young man was 16, newly orphaned and inheriting a fortune that would have destroyed a lesser person. He had watched Damien build walls of arrogance and cynicism to protect himself from a world that saw him primarily as a bank account with legs. He had guided him through business deals worth billions, social scandals that would have toppled governments, and romantic entanglements that had left a trail of broken hearts across 3 continents. But he had never seen Damien look at another human being the way he was looking at Valentina Reyes. The young woman stood in the center of the dance floor, still catching her breath, seemingly unaware that she had just accomplished something remarkable. She had not only matched Damien step for step, she had revealed depths in him that Theodore had begun to think didn't exist. "Extraordinary," Theodore murmured to himself, noting how Damien seemed reluctant to release Valentina's hand, how his usual mask of superiority had slipped to reveal something vulnerable and entirely human. The crowd was still applauding, their initial amusement transformed into genuine admiration. Theodore watched as Damien finally remembered where he was and what was expected of him. The young millionaire straightened, his public persona sliding back into place like armor, but not quite quickly enough to hide what Theodore had seen. "Well," Damien announced to the crowd, his voice carrying its usual commanding tone, despite a slight tremor that only someone who knew him well would notice, "it seems we have our winner." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the sapphire bracelet, its Austrian royal provenance making it worth more than most people's homes. But as he held it out to Valentina, Theodore noticed something fascinating. Damien's hand was shaking. Valentina accepted the bracelet with grace, but Theodore observed that she didn't immediately put it on. Instead, she held it carefully, as if she understood its value went beyond mere money. "Thank you," she said simply, and Theodore was struck by the dignity in her voice. No gushing gratitude, no false modesty, just honest acknowledgement of what had been earned. "The partnership stands as well," Damien added, and Theodore caught the slight question in his tone, as if he was suddenly uncertain whether she would want to honor that part of their agreement. "You'll be my dance partner for the season. The governor's ball is next Friday. I'll have my assistant contact you with the details." Something shifted in Valentina's expression, a flicker of reality reasserting itself. "I work nights," she said quietly. "I'm not sure I can—" "You can," Theodore interjected smoothly, stepping forward before Damien could respond with what would undoubtedly be an arrogant dismissal of her concerns. "I'm Theodore Blackwood, Damien's business partner. We'll make arrangements to ensure your schedule accommodates these events." He extended his hand to Valentina, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the strength of her grip that spoke of character. "That was truly magnificent dancing, Miss Reyes," she supplied. "Valentina Reyes." "Miss Reyes," Theodore continued with the courtly manner that had made him successful in both business and society. "Would you allow me to arrange transportation home for you this evening? I suspect you have an early morning ahead of you." Valentina glanced between Theodore and Damien, clearly processing the sudden change in her circumstances. "I need to finish my shift," she said practically. "I can't just leave." "Consider your shift finished," Theodore said with gentle authority. "I'll speak with your supervisor. There will be no issue with your employment." As if summoned by his words, Maria appeared at Valentina's side, eyes wide with concern and amazement. She whispered rapidly in Spanish, clearly trying to understand what had just happened to her co-worker. Theodore watched this exchange with interest, then turned to study Damien, who was staring at Valentina with an expression Theodore had never seen before. Not desire exactly, though that was certainly present, but something deeper, recognition perhaps, as if he had just discovered something he hadn't known he was looking for. The crowd was beginning to disperse, the evening's entertainment having reached its dramatic conclusion. Several people approached to congratulate both Damien and Valentina, but Theodore noticed how Damien's responses were mechanical, his attention still focused on the young woman who had somehow managed to crack his carefully constructed facade. "You should go," Theodore said quietly to Valentina, noting how the attention was beginning to overwhelm her. "The evening has been quite enough for one night, but Miss Reyes—" He waited until she looked at him directly. "What happened here tonight, that was real. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." Valentina nodded solemnly, understanding passing between them. She turned to Damien, who was still standing as if frozen in place. "Thank you for the dance," she said formally, but Theodore caught the underlying warmth in her voice that suggested the connection he had witnessed hadn't been one-sided. "Thank you," Damien replied, his voice softer than Theodore had heard it in years, for reminding me what dancing is supposed to feel like. As Valentina walked away with Maria, threading through the crowd toward the service exit, Theodore moved to stand beside his protégé. They watched in silence until she disappeared from view. "Well," Theodore said mildly, "that was unexpected." Damien turned to him with an expression of someone who had just experienced an earthquake. She's extraordinary, isn't she?" "Indeed she is," Theodore agreed. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Damien's jaw tightened, his familiar arrogance reasserting itself. "What do you mean? She won the challenge fairly. I'll honor my commitment to the partnership. It should be amusing to introduce her to society." Theodore raised an eyebrow. "Amusing? Is that what you call what I just witnessed?" "What else would it be?" "Growth," Theodore said simply. "For the first time in the 12 years I've known you, I watched you encounter someone who challenged not just your skills, but your assumptions about yourself and others. You danced with her like you were equals." "She's a waitress, Theodore," Damien said, but his tone lacked its usual conviction. "She's a woman who just outclassed half the debutantes in this ballroom while working a shift to pay for her brother's education," Theodore replied, having made some discreet inquiries while the dance was happening. "She's someone who learned to waltz in community centers and church halls, not private studios. She has more grace in her little finger than most people acquire in a lifetime of privilege." Damien was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dance floor where they had moved together with such perfect synchronization. "I don't know how to do this, Theodore," he admitted finally, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the residual noise of the gala. "I don't know how to be with someone who sees through all my defenses." "Then perhaps," Theodore suggested gently, "it's time to learn to be someone who doesn't need them." As the evening wound down around them, Theodore watched his protégé grapple with the possibility of becoming someone worthy of the extraordinary woman who had just waltzed her way into his carefully ordered world. It was, he reflected, going to be fascinating to witness what happened next. The awakening. Carmen Delacroix had built her reputation on reading people the way others read stock reports, quickly, accurately, and always with an eye toward profit. At 35, she had perfected the art of being exactly what powerful men wanted: beautiful without being threatening, intelligent without being challenging, sophisticated without being demanding. Her French accent, acquired during genuine years at the Sorbonne, provided the perfect exotic flavor to her carefully cultivated persona. She had been Damien Cross's on-and-off romantic interest for 3 years, a relationship that suited them both perfectly. He provided her with access to the highest echelons of society, while she provided him with a companion who understood that their connection was transactional rather than emotional. Neither had pretended to love the other, which had made their arrangement refreshingly honest by the standards of their social circle. Until tonight. Carmen stood in the marble-appointed ladies' lounge of the Grand Meridian, ostensibly touching up her lipstick but actually processing what she had witnessed on the dance floor. The image was burned into her memory, Damien, looking at that waitress with an expression she had never seen him wear before. Not lust. She understood lust and could work with it. Not even infatuation, which was manageable and temporary. What she had seen was recognition, the look of a man who had just discovered something he hadn't known existed. "Quite the little show tonight," came a voice behind her. Lady Pemberton, the wife of a British lord and one of society's most accomplished. Gossips appeared in the mirror beside Carmen. "I must say, Damien certainly knows how to provide entertainment." "Indeed," Carmen replied smoothly, capping her lipstick with practiced precision. though I suspect the entertainment is far from over. Oh, surely you don't think he's serious about this partnership business? Lady Pemberton laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. The novelty will wear off by next week. Men like Damien don't really associate with the help, no matter how prettily they dance. Carmen turned to face the older woman directly. You might be surprised, Margaret. Damien has always been unpredictable when something captures his genuine interest. And therein lay the problem. In 3 years, Carmen had never seen Damien's genuine interest captured by anything more substantial than a new business venture or a particularly challenging acquisition. He approached relationships the way he approached everything else, as games to be won, puzzles to be solved, entertainment to be consumed and discarded. But tonight she had watched him dance with that girl, Valentina was it, and seen something she had thought impossible. She had seen him completely present, completely engaged, completely vulnerable, in a way that suggested this was not a game to him. Carmen left the ladies' lounge and made her way back to the ballroom, where clusters of guests were still dissecting the evening's unexpected turn of events. She spotted Damien near the bar, accepting congratulations and deflecting questions, with his usual charming evasiveness. But Carmen knew him well enough to see the distraction beneath his social performance. "Darling," she said, approaching with the graceful glide that had taken years to perfect, "what a delightfully dramatic evening you've provided." Damien turned to her with something like relief in his expression. Carmen represented familiarity, predictability, safe harbor after whatever storm had just hit him on that dance floor. "Carmen, I was wondering where you'd disappeared to." "Oh, you know how these things are," she replied airily, taking his arm in the possessive gesture that had become second nature over the years. "One must allow time for the gossips to process their material. Speaking of which, I'm hearing the most fascinating theories about your new dance partner." Something shuddered in Damien's expression. People always have theories. It rarely has much to do with reality. "Of course," Carmen agreed, but she was watching him carefully. "Though I must say, she danced quite well for someone of her background. Tell me, where exactly did you discover her?" "She works for the catering company," Damien said curtly, and Carmen caught the slight defensive edge in his voice that confirmed her growing concern. "How wonderfully democratic of you to include her in your little game," Carmen continued, her tone remaining light and conversational. "Though I do hope you've considered the practical difficulties of your arrangement. The social season can be quite demanding for someone unaccustomed to our world." She was probing now, testing to see how protective he would become. In the past, Damien would have joined her in amused analysis of an outsider's inevitable social gaffes. Instead, she watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I'm sure she'll manage," he said, his tone carrying a warning that Carmen was skilled enough to recognize. Interesting, and very dangerous. "Of course she will," Carmen agreed smoothly. "With proper guidance, naturally. It would be tragic to see someone so charming, overwhelmed by expectations she couldn't possibly understand." The threat was delicately delivered, but unmistakable. Carmen was an expert at the subtle art of social destruction, the well-placed whisper, the strategic exclusion, the carefully crafted doubt that could reduce someone's reputation to rubble without anyone ever being able to trace the damage back to its source. Damien turned to face her fully, and Carmen felt a chill at the coldness in his green eyes. "Carmen," he said quietly, "I'm going to say this once, and I want to be very clear. Valentina Reyes earned her place at my side tonight, through skill, grace, and courage. Anyone who suggests otherwise, or who attempts to make her feel unwelcome in any venue where she appears as my partner, will discover exactly how unpleasant I can be when someone attacks what I value." The words hit Carmen like a physical blow. In 3 years, Damien had never spoken of her with that protective intensity. He had never claimed to value her beyond her usefulness. He had certainly never threatened social warfare on her behalf. "Damien," she said carefully, "surely you're not suggesting that a momentary fascination with novelty is worth damaging your position in society? People are already talking. If you continue to elevate this girl beyond her proper place—" "Her proper place," Damien interrupted, his voice carrying a dangerous quiet that made Carmen step back involuntarily, "is wherever she chooses to be. And if anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to discuss it with me directly." Carmen stared at him, truly seeing for the first time the magnitude of what had happened tonight. This wasn't infatuation or novelty-seeking. This was something far more threatening to everything she had built her life around. Damien Cross, the man who had never cared deeply about anything or anyone, had apparently discovered something worth caring about, and it wasn't her. "I see," she said finally, her composure intact despite the earthquake happening beneath her carefully constructed world. "Well, then I suppose congratulations are in order, for both of you." She turned to leave, then paused as if struck by an afterthought. "Though I do hope Miss Reyes understands what she's getting herself into. Your world can be quite unforgiving to those who don't belong." As Carmen walked away, her mind was already working, analyzing angles and possibilities. She had not survived in their ruthless social ecosystem by accepting defeat gracefully. If Damien thought a waitress with pretty eyes and natural grace could simply waltz into their world without consequences, he was about to receive a very expensive education. But as she glanced back to see him staring after Valentina's departed figure with that same expression of wonder and recognition, Carmen felt something she rarely experienced: genuine fear. Because for the first time in their relationship, she suspected that Damien might actually be willing to fight for someone, and if that someone was a working-class girl with nothing to lose and everything to gain, Carmen might have just met her match in a way she had never anticipated. The game, it seemed, was about to become far more interesting and far more dangerous than anyone had expected. The true partnership, Rafael Reyes, had always possessed wisdom beyond his 22 years, a quality born from watching his sister sacrifice her dreams so he could pursue his own. Sitting in their small apartment at 3 a.m, medical textbooks spread across the kitchen table that served as his desk, he looked up to see Valentina standing in the doorway, still wearing her catering uniform and holding a sapphire bracelet that caught the lamplight like captured starfire. "Hermana," he said softly, closing his anatomy book and giving her his full attention. "Tell me everything." And she did. Valentina sank into the chair across from him, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking as she described the most extraordinary evening of her life. She told him about Damien's arrogant challenge, about the moment she decided to accept it, about the dance that had felt like flying and falling simultaneously. Raphael listened without interruption, watching his sister's face transform as she relived each moment. He had seen Valentina dance before, in their childhood apartment with their grandmother, at community center classes, in empty spaces when she thought no one was watching. He knew her talent was real, but more than that, he understood what dancing meant to her. It was the one part of herself she had never been able to entirely sacrifice to necessity. "He wants you to be his partner for the entire social season," Raphael said when she finished, stating it as fact rather than question. "Yes, but Rafa, I can't. The time commitment alone would mean losing at least one of my jobs, maybe two. And these people, you should have seen how they looked at me, like I was some kind of trained animal performing tricks." Raphael studied the bracelet she still held, noting how she gripped it as if it might disappear. "How much is that worth?" Valentina shrugged. I looked it up on my phone during the cab ride home. Conservative estimate, $200,000. Maybe more because of its provenance. 200,000, Raphael repeated quietly. That's more than you make in 5 years. It's not about the money, Valentina said quickly, but Raphael caught the way her voice wavered. Isn't it, though? He asked gently. At least partially. Val, you've been working yourself into exhaustion to pay for my education. You've never bought yourself anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. You haven't been on a date in 2 years because you're too tired from working 3 jobs. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Valentina was quiet for a long moment. I'm happy when you succeed, she said finally. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Raphael reached across the small table to cover her hand with his. Tell me about him. Not the millionaire part, not the social status part. Tell me about the man you danced with. Valentina's expression softened, and Raphael saw something there he hadn't seen in years, a glimpse of his sister as she might have been if circumstances had been different. He's arrogant, she said, but there was no heat in it. Privileged beyond belief, used to getting whatever he wants without question. She paused, seeming to search for words. But when we were dancing, it was like he forgot all of that. Like he became someone real instead of someone performing. And you felt something for him. It wasn't a question. Raphael knew his sister too well to miss the signs. I felt something, Valentina admitted reluctantly. But Rafa, it doesn't matter what I felt. We live in completely different worlds. He'll realize that soon enough and move on to whatever amuses him next. Raphael leaned back in his chair, studying his sister with the analytical mind that was making him an excellent medical student. What if he doesn't? What do you mean? What if he's serious about this partnership? What if he's as affected by what happened tonight as you are? What then? Valentina shook her head. People like him don't have serious feelings for people like us. We're entertainment, diversion. When the novelty wears off, stop, Raphael interrupted firmly. Stop deciding what other people think before giving them the chance to prove you wrong. You know what I learned in psychology class? The biggest barrier to people changing their circumstances isn't external obstacles. It's their own belief that they don't deserve better. This isn't about deserving. Yes, it is. Raphael's voice carried the quiet authority that made him effective with difficult patients during his clinical rotations. You've spent so long taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten you're allowed to want things for yourself. You're allowed to be valued for who you are, not just what you can provide. Valentina stared at the bracelet in her hands. What if I try and fail? What if I embarrass myself, embarrass you? What if you try and succeed? Raphael countered. What if you discover that you're capable of more than you ever imagined? Val, you've already proved you can hold your own in his world. You outclassed women who've been training their entire lives. The question isn't whether you're good enough. The question is whether you're brave enough. Before Valentina could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it, then looked up at Raphael with wide eyes. What is it? It's from someone named Theodore Blackwood, Damien's business partner. She read from her phone. Miss Reyes, I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted to reach out regarding the arrangements for Friday's Governor's Ball. Would you be available to meet tomorrow afternoon to discuss the details? Also, I've taken the liberty of ensuring your employers understand that your schedule may need some flexibility in the coming weeks. Your positions remain secure, regardless of your decision regarding the partnership. Raphael raised an eyebrow. Sounds like they're serious about making this work. It's just business to them, Valentina said, but Raphael could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Maybe. Or maybe they recognize something valuable when they see it. He stood up, gathering his textbooks. Val, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. You raised me when our parents couldn't. You worked jobs you hated to pay for my dreams. You taught me that family means showing up for each other no matter what the cost." He paused at the door to their shared bedroom, looking back at his sister who had given up so much for his sake. "Now it's my turn to show up for you. Take the partnership, dance with him, see where it leads. I'll handle the rest." "Rafa, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm telling you. It's time for you to have your turn at something extraordinary." The next afternoon, Valentina met Theodore Blackwood at an elegant cafe in the Arts District. He was exactly what she had expected from Damien's business partner: polished, sophisticated, clearly wealthy, but there was a warmth in his manner that she hadn't anticipated. "Miss Reyes," he said, rising as she approached his table, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I hope you'll forgive the informality of the setting, but I thought you might be more comfortable somewhere less intimidating than a corporate office." As they talked through the practical details of the partnership, scheduling, transportation, appropriate attire, Valentina found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. Theodore had a gift for making even the most overwhelming arrangements seem manageable. "If you don't mind me asking," she said during a lull in their conversation, "why are you doing all this? The job security, the arrangements, this goes far beyond what was agreed to last night." Theodore was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Miss Reyes, in my experience, extraordinary things happen when the right people are given the right opportunities. What I witnessed last night was extraordinary. It would be a tragedy to let practical obstacles prevent that potential from being explored." "You think I have potential?" The question slipped out before Valentina could stop it. "I think," Theodore said carefully, "that you have already demonstrated remarkable grace under pressure, genuine talent, and the courage to take risks when it matters. These are rare qualities in any social circle." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "I also think Damien has never looked at another human being the way he looked at you last night. For better or worse, that young man is utterly fascinated by you." "Fascination isn't the same as respect," Valentina pointed out. "No," Theodore agreed, "but it can be the beginning of it. The question is whether you're willing to demand that respect rather than simply hoping he'll offer it." That evening, Valentina called the number Theodore had given her. Damien answered on the second ring. "Valentina." His voice carried warmth that seemed genuine rather than performed. "I've thought about your offer," she said without preamble. "I'll accept the partnership, but I have conditions." There was a pause. "I'm listening." "First, this is a true partnership. I'm not a prop or an accessory. If I'm going to represent you at these events, I expect to be treated as an equal." "Agreed." "Second, I won't change who I am to fit into your world. I'm proud of where I come from and the work I do. I wouldn't want you to change." "And third," Valentina continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "if you're looking for entertainment or novelty, find someone else. I don't have time for games." Another pause, longer this time. When Damien spoke again, his voice was softer, more serious than she had heard it before. "Valentina, I need you to know something. What happened last night,